Have you ever noticed that some movements in life only reveal themselves when we stop fighting against them? As if every effort to correct, justify, or hide were just another knot tightening inside us. There is a strange force in the simple act of not reacting, a pause that is not weakness but openness. In that silent space, something begins to reorganize, as if chaos had been waiting precisely for this surrender in order to align. Science shows us that complex systems often reach order not through the imposition of control, but through the acceptance of their own fluctuations. The heart, for example, does not beat in a perfectly mathematical rhythm. It dances with small irregularities that, paradoxically, guarantee its vitality. Life does not demand rigid symmetry, but the permission to be as it is. When you accept your own inner pulse, you discover that imperfection carries harmony. In the silence of self-observation, what once seemed confusing begins to take shape. It is like entering a dark room and, instead of running desperately in search of the exit, allowing your eyes to adjust to the dimness. Little by little, the forms appear. Not because someone explained them, but because you stayed, because you accepted being there. Many flee from this place, believing silence to be emptiness. But what if silence is, in fact, a fertile field, where meaning rests before manifesting? When you stop forcing yourself to fit into external molds and simply observe, you discover that you do not need to artificially construct meaning. Meaning is already unfolding, and all that was missing was your acceptance. And it is at this point that something profound begins to reveal itself. Acceptance is not resignation, nor the abandonment of the desire for transformation. Acceptance is taking your hands off the throat of your own experience, allowing it to breathe, letting life show itself in its natural form before trying to redesign it. It is as if the universe had its own cadence, but we, impatient, try to impose a rigid beat that never fits. By letting go of the effort to control, we realize that the natural movement is already enough to guide us. Contemporary physics offers us clues about this. In quantum systems, the simple act of observation alters the behavior of particles, not because consciousness forces a change, but because looking openly allows one of the infinite possibilities to manifest. Self-acceptance has this same power. What once seemed chaotic, undefined, or painful begins to reorganize simply by being seen without resistance. The energy that was once spent in struggle is transformed into clarity. In the psychological field, acceptance is also a key to balance. Studies on mindfulness show that states of non-judgmental observation reduce stress levels, modulate the body's response, and broaden perception. When you observe yourself without the hurry to correct, you create a space where thoughts lose their rigidity, like blocks of ice that begin to melt under the light. It is not necessary to break them by force, just allow the warmth of presence. This silent observation is not passivity. It requires courage, for it means looking directly at oneself, even at the parts we would rather deny. It is like entering a forest without a map, where every unknown sound can awaken anxiety. But as you remain, the ear begins to distinguish between noise and music. The same happens within us. What once seemed a threat can become melody, and there is something even subtler. Acceptance is not limited to thoughts or emotions. It also involves the body, gestures, the micro-expressions that reveal our truth without us realizing it. The body always speaks first. How many times has tension in the shoulders announced an unadmitted fear? How many times does the stomach tighten before the mind formulates a worry? Observing yourself in silence also means listening to these hidden languages. When we do not fight against the body, it becomes an ally, a living compass. In this sense, accepting oneself is a practice of reconciliation. It is not just agreeing with one's choices, but embracing shadow, error, and fragility. The spirituality of many traditions points to this integration. In Taoism, for example, yin and yang are not eternal enemies in conflict, but complements that only exist together. The night does not deny the day, it announces it. Mistake does not cancel out success, it prepares for it. By realizing this, the mind stops seeking unattainable perfection and begins to lean toward the real as it is. Silence here is not the absence of sound, but the absence of judgment. It is an internal space where each thought can arrive without being immediately classified as good or bad. At first, this space seems small, almost unreachable, but as it is practiced, it expands, like a horizon that recedes as we advance. Within it, conflicts lose strength. Life begins to make sense, not because magical answers appear, but because the questions cease to be threatening. Imagine a river flowing among stones. The flow does not stop before the obstacle, but it also does not need to destroy it. It goes around, integrates, dances with resistance. To accept oneself is to become that river, to recognize the stones, but not reduce oneself to them. And silence is the invisible bank that guides the course, not by imposing, but by allowing. In practice, this attitude can transform everyday perception. Situations that once aroused despair come to be seen with greater breadth. Traffic ceases to be just a delay and becomes a space for breathing. A criticism ceases to be a threat and reveals itself as an invitation to listen. Even loneliness is reconfigured. It is not punishment, but fertile ground for self-encounter. Everything begins to make sense because you stop demanding that meaning come from outside. It arises from the intimate relationship between presence and acceptance, and at this point, life is no longer an equation to be solved, but a living organism that reveals itself in layers. The more you observe in silence, the more the contours of the real appear, not as imposition but as revelation. By remaining in this state of serene observation, perception begins to expand like a field that had never been noticed. It is not only the mind that clears, it is as if the very space around were transformed into language. The wind that passes through the leaves ceases to be just sound. It becomes a reminder that everything moves in cycles. Flowing water is no longer just a vital resource. It becomes a portrait of our ability to flow without losing essence. Each daily detail, once invisible, gains unexpected depth. To speak of this, one must resort to images that touch the invisible. Think of a mosaic of glass scattered across the floor. Colorful fragments, seemingly disconnected, reflect light unevenly. To those who look in haste, they are only shards. But those who remain, in silence and acceptance, begin to perceive that the pieces already contain the design of the whole. It is the patience of the gaze that reveals hidden beauty. Inner life works in the same way. Only when we approach without demanding perfection do we realize that imperfections also compose the pattern. In the mystical tradition of some peoples, there is talk of a secret breath of the earth, a deep rhythm not heard with the ears, but vibrating within the attentive body. This myth points to something essential. Meaning is not a distant enigma, but a pulse already circulating in us. By silencing and accepting, we enter into resonance with this pulse. What seemed like chance reveals itself as synchronicity. What seemed empty reveals itself as density. This change in perception can also be understood through the lens of science. In astrophysics, stars that seem static to us are, in fact, bodies in constant transformation. Their apparent stability results from opposing forces in perfect balance. Gravity pulling inward and nuclear fusion pushing outward. Inner life follows a similar logic. Accepting oneself is not to annul the tension between internal forces, but to recognize that from this dynamic balance, personal luminosity is born. We can also think of another image, a city seen from above at night. Lit streets, shadows between buildings, invisible movements beneath the darkness. Up close, the confusion of traffic, noises, fragments of conversation. But from above, a secret order reveals itself. Lines of light intersect, form networks, compose a living organism. To accept oneself is like gaining this aerial view of one's own existence. What once seemed a tangle of chaotic streets shows itself as a coherent design. In this state, inner silence does not mean absence of life, but space for movements to align. It is like opening a clearing in the middle of a dense forest. Suddenly, the light finds passage, sounds organize, the path becomes visible. This clearing is not found outside. It is cultivated within through attentive observation and the renunciation of useless struggle against what already is. The paradox is that acceptance does not eliminate pain, but makes it habitable. Instead of suffocating discomfort, you recognize it as part of the landscape. It is like walking on a mountain, and realizing that the stones on the ground are not isolated obstacles, but part of the very trail that leads to the summit. The mind that insists on rejection stumbles repeatedly. The mind that accepts learns to use each stone as support. In various cultures, stories of spiritual initiation speak of characters who only found clarity when they surrendered. It is not about submission, but about trust. The warrior who drops the sword, the traveler who abandons the map, the sage who decides to listen instead of teaching. In each narrative, the turning point happens when resistance gives way to presence. At this point, everything gains new meaning. What was once chaos becomes code. Perceiving this is like discovering that silence is not empty. It contains layers. A first layer is discomfort, the noise of the mind that insists on filling. Then comes a second, a field of calm where thoughts dissolve. And then a third, a subtle vibration where meaning is not thought but felt. Remaining until reaching this last layer is like entering an invisible cathedral erected within one's own body. By embracing these images, we begin to understand that acceptance and silence are not temporary passages, but ways of being. They transform ordinary perception into something extraordinary. The mosaic reveals its figure. The star reveals its balance. The city reveals its secret order. Everything was already there. What changed was only the way of looking. Up to this point, acceptance has seemed like something gentle, almost like making room for things to find order on their own. But there is an inevitable breaking point. Accepting yourself also means facing the fact that the incessant search for meaning is, in itself, a form of escape. You believed that silence would bring clear answers, well-organized sentences, definitive explanations. But what if true meaning is not an explanation, but a living experience, impossible to be captured in words? This revelation causes discomfort because we have grown used to linking clarity with control. The mind wants definitions, the security of saying, "I already know," except the mystery of life does not fit into that craving. The paradox is that the more you insist on knowing, the farther you get from direct experience. It is like trying to hold water in your hands. The more force you apply, the more it slips away. Silence accepts the water as it is, and therefore remains wet. At this moment, logic comes undone. It is no longer about thinking in order to understand, but about opening yourself to a state in which understanding itself happens effortlessly. Physics shows us something similar in the behavior of light. It can be particle or wave depending on how it is observed, and neither description is complete on its own. In the same way, you are not only what you think, nor merely what you feel. You are the living tension between the undefined and the manifest. This break in expectation is like turning a camera lens. Everything that was previously in focus, fears, justifications, comparisons, goes out of focus, and the background, once blurred, begins to appear. You realize that meaning was not in the details you tried to control, but in the broader field that sustained them. Life does not ask you to decipher it like a riddle. It asks you to inhabit it like a territory. It is at this point that many spiritual traditions speak of symbolic death. The self that believed it owned the truth needs to dissolve so that another level of consciousness can blossom. This process is not romantic. It can be abrupt, even painful. It is like waking from a dream and realizing that all certainties were well-constructed illusions. But at the same time, it is liberating. The burden of sustaining a rigid identity dissolves, and space opens for a more fluid existence. The pattern break lies not only in the content of the experience, but in the way you relate to it. Until then, the habit was to react, to judge, to explain, to resist. Now the shift is to accept even the absence of explanations. And in this space, a new freedom arises. It is not about giving up, but about expansion. Silence is no longer just observation. It becomes creation. This point is crucial. Up to now, you believed that accepting meant allowing the world to make sense. But what if silence is precisely the place where you realize that the world does not need to have meaning, because it already is meaning in motion? There is nothing to be deciphered, but something to be lived. What seemed like searching reveals itself as encounter. What seemed like waiting shows itself as presence. And it is exactly in this space of rupture that the video also becomes an invitation. If this content resonated within you, if some sentence touched the place that cannot be explained, allow this movement to continue beyond the screen. Like this video, not as an automatic gesture, but as an affirmation that you recognize this territory of acceptance in yourself. And write in the comments, "I choose the silence that creates." This sentence is not a magic password, but a symbolic mark of those who have already realized that true meaning is not found, it is lived. This realization that meaning is not found but lived has always been described through symbolic narratives. It is as if humanity had chosen to tell stories to give shape to something that cannot be explained directly. And one of these stories tells of a traveler who walked through a desert without maps, guided only by a compass that, strangely, never pointed north. For a long time, she believed the compass was broken. She tried to adjust it, turned it in the palm of her hand, argued with her own thoughts, seeking to fix what seemed faulty. Each step taken was accompanied by the doubt, "Am I lost?" The burning sand, the dry wind, the endless horizon, everything seemed to reinforce the feeling that something was wrong. But the compass remained steady in its indication, pointing toward a nameless direction. It was only when the traveler gave up trying to fix the instrument that a profound change occurred. She stopped arguing with the needle, let go of attempts to force north, and decided to follow where the pointer insisted on pointing. There was no immediate sign of reward, no magical revelation in the sky, only steps, silence, the decision to trust. Days later, the landscape began to change. Among the dunes, stones appeared, and from those stones, water sprang. The traveler understood, without anyone explaining, that the compass had never been broken. The mistake lay in her expectation that it should point to what everyone called north. The compass did not show geographic direction, it showed inner direction. And only when she accepted this did the desert cease to be a prison and become a passage. This story, transmitted as myth in some ancient cultures, echoes exactly the movement we have described so far. Silence and acceptance do not offer guarantees of the kind the mind desires. They promise neither shortcuts nor ready-made maps. They offer only a pointer that insists on aiming inward, toward a place that defies the logic of control. Following this direction requires trust, requires letting go of the idea that everything must fit together predictably. In archetypal psychology, this traveler represents the figure of the seeker. The seeker is not on a journey to conquer external territories, but to recognize their own interiority. He or she walks in arid terrains because it is there that the illusion of control dissolves. Only in the emptiness of the desert is it possible to perceive that the compass is not error, but truth. Likewise, only in deep silence does one perceive that the mind no longer needs to manufacture explanations. It can simply accompany the movement of life. This narrative also finds an echo in science. A phenomenon known as stochastic resonance shows that even in noisy systems, a weak signal can be amplified by the presence of the noise itself. In other words, what seemed like mere chaos can in fact be an ally in revealing essential information. This is exactly what the traveler discovers. The wind that confused her trail becomes the same wind that refreshes and points the way. Error turns into guide. The symbolic power of this story lies in revealing that acceptance is not just a personal attitude, it is an opening to a greater intelligence that guides us without our understanding all the details. The traveler's compass does not lie, but it also does not explain itself. Its strength is in the invitation to trust. Just as in us, acceptance does not fix life, but reveals that it was never broken. Inner silence, then, can be compared to this invisible compass. It does not give ready answers, but points to a direction that is only confirmed by walking. With each step taken in trust, the desert becomes less hostile. The body aligns with the movement of existence itself. What once seemed doubt transforms into quiet confidence. And perhaps the greatest beauty of this story lies precisely in the fact that the traveler only found an oasis when she gave up looking for an oasis. By ceasing to demand immediate results, she allowed the path to reveal its own fertility. The same happens with us. By accepting, we stop forcing life to prove its coherence, and in that act we discover that meaning is already there, waiting to be lived. The traveler's story leaves us with a powerful key. Trusting inner direction is more a gesture of the body than a reasoning of the mind. For this gesture to happen, it is necessary to give practical form to acceptance and silence, turning them into concrete experience. Only then does the concept become vibration, and the vibration become part of daily life. Close your eyes for a moment. Allow your breath to become the first meeting point. Do not try to control it, nor speed it up or slow it down. Simply notice how the air enters and leaves, with the naturalness of one who has always known the way. This simple observation is already an exercise in acceptance. The body breathes on its own, without orders, without effort. By noticing this, you realize that an essential part of life flows without needing your interference. Now bring your attention to the sounds around you. Maybe there are distant noises, maybe a denser silence. Instead of rejecting or trying to modify what you hear, allow all sounds to be part of the scene. The same goes for the thoughts that arise. They may appear, repeat themselves, even distract. But instead of fighting them, simply acknowledge their presence, like clouds crossing a sky that remains intact. This simple practice trains the heart to welcome everything without resistance. With your eyes still closed, bring awareness to the center of your chest. You do not need to visualize anything specific. Just feel the region, as if there were a field of energy there. If warmth, tingling, or simply a neutral sensation arises, accept it as it is. Allow this area of the body to become the point of silence. Each breath widens this inner clearing, a space where thoughts become less rigid and emotions find rest. Now, bring the traveler's memory closer to your own experience. Think of something in your life that seemed like a broken compass, a mistake, a loss, a choice that did not turn out as expected. Instead of rejecting this memory, hold it gently before you, like someone holding a fragile object with both hands. It is not necessary to justify it or erase it. Just let it exist, and notice that even this episode is part of the path you walk. At this point, allow your breath to deepen. Inhale slowly, as if bringing into yourself the energy of what is alive now. Exhale even more slowly, as if letting go of all unnecessary judgment. Repeat this cycle a few times until you feel that the memory that once seemed heavy becomes lighter, less threatening. The silence around it is already beginning to transform it. Then, bring your attention to your feet. Notice the contact with the ground, the weight that supports your daily walk. Imagine that from the soles of your feet extends a network of invisible roots that connect with the earth. This image is not merely poetic. It triggers in the body the sensation of safety, as if reminding you that you are part of something greater, stable, fertile. Feeling this support helps you accept the present, no matter how uncertain it may seem. Remain for a few moments in this state, free breathing, conscious body, memory welcomed, feet rooted. It is in this combination that acceptance ceases to be a word and becomes lived experience. You do not need to seek meaning outside yourself. The body itself in silence already contains the direction. When you open your eyes, notice how the space around you also seems different, not because something has changed outside, but because you have changed the way of looking. This is the central point. The exercise does not deliver ready answers, but opens space for meaning to reveal itself. And by practicing it consistently, silence ceases to be an interval and becomes a state of being. Accepting yourself, then, is no longer a distant ideal, but a daily gesture that begins in the simple act of breathing, feeling, and allowing. A gesture that can be repeated at any moment of the day, turning even the most common noises into part of life's symphony. When you open your eyes after the exercise, something subtly shifts. The world remains the same, but the contact with it is no longer the same. Colors seem denser, sounds gain contour. The body finds a place of rest without needing to justify itself. The silence cultivated within does not disappear upon returning to routine. It accompanies each gesture, like background music that supports without demanding attention. And at this point we realize that meaning was never hidden in distant formulas. It pulses in each breath, in each simple choice, in each instant in which we do not fight against ourselves. Accepting yourself does not mean stopping growth, but abandoning the illusion that only control brings clarity. Real growth is born from this state in which life is allowed, in which the gaze softens and the heart stops fighting with existence itself. Silence is not absence, it is deeper presence. It is in it that we discover that the path need not be deciphered like a riddle, but lived as experience. And the more we surrender to this way of being in the world, the more we realize that there is no contradiction between mystery and meaning. Mystery is meaning itself in motion. If you have come this far, write in the comments, "I accept the silence within me." This sentence is the mark of someone who not only listened, but experienced what was said to the end. And if this content resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and allow this journey to continue. Not out of obligation, but because each encounter like this can rekindle in you the reminder that everything begins to make sense at the very point where you allow yourself to accept and observe in silence.